We're joining us now in the studio, Hal Miller. He's the president of the Mississippi Trucking Association. Thanks for coming in, Hal.
Thank you for inviting me.
You bet. So, start out, if you don't mind, Hal, just explaining your connection and your family's connection to the trucking industry.
Okay. Well, I started out in the trucking industry when I was 13 years old, and that would be almost 50 years ago now. My family owned a trucking company that, at the time we sold a few years ago, was the oldest family-held trucking company in the state, a company called Miller Transporters. So I grew up in the trucking industry, and then a few years back, I jumped from the frying pan into the fire. I decided to go over and run the State Trucking Association, which I'd been a part of for almost 30 years prior to that, sitting on the board and what have you. So I've been in trucking for a long time.
Great folks, great company, tremendous asset for the state of Mississippi, and you guys did great. So I don't know if you remember this. Just a quick note. When I was a baby consultant at Arthur Anderson, I spent some time. Yep. You remember that? We did a project there.
Remember that, and then also I think Venture Technologies provided a lot of our information services as well. So
we did. Yep. Appreciate that. Anyhow, glad to have you in. So, talk first to us, Hal. You and I last, I think, discussed this out at KWLM about the Troopers and Truckers program. Tell us about that.
Okay. Well, the Troopers and Truckers program started back in 2013, and it's a partnership between motor carriers and the Department of Public Safety, Highway Patrol, their motor carrier division. And what it's initially and what it still does is the objective is to basically the troopers and the truckers working together to identify those drivers that maybe are unsafe, whether it be overly aggressive or whether it be distracted. And basically what you saw initially was troopers would get in the truck with a truck driver and ride with a truck driver and observe those things going around the truck. Okay. And then those troopers would then identify that potentially unsafe driver and radio ahead to another trooper ahead and say, okay, you've got a so-and-so car or so-and-so truck. It just did this, it did that, pick him up when he comes by you. Yeah. And it was very successful because it brought a lot of attention to safety and safe operating and gave the troopers a great view of what truck drivers deal with. And as you know, people sometimes are a little less than patient with trucks and decide they'll get even by once they get around them, they may cut over in front of them quickly and pop the brakes, which is just counterintuitive. That's not a good idea. So the troopers learned a lot, and so did the truck drivers. It also, the troopers will go to different trucking companies and put on safety lessons or safety seminars to the drivers, and basically, again, make that relationship between the troopers and the truckers. And the Trucking Association and Department of Public Safety, Highway Patrol have got a fantastic relationship, and the leadership there and DPS is fantastic. Yes. And we are partners. We all have the same objective. We want safe highways, period.
Sure. Absolutely. So, I've got friends and mutual friends that are in the trucking business, and one of the things they talk about are just a number of frivolous lawsuits that get filed against truckers. And, of course, insurance ends up having to cover and pay. We all pay for that at the end of the day.
Exactly. And it's kind of the problem with that is in trying to deal with those nuclear verdicts, as they're called, is you can't do that on a federal level. Each state has to deal with that. Fortunately, Mississippi had some leadership several years back to start dealing with some tort reform to try and bring that back into control. Yeah. But at the end of the day, even with Mississippi in a more favorable tort environment, these trucks are running all over the country. So when a trucking company based in Mississippi goes to buy insurance, once he finds someone that can write the insurance, he's going to pay significantly because, for the most part, he runs 48 contiguous states, and so he's running into some pretty bad areas. And several states have worked on trying to correct some of those problems, which is great.
Well, just anecdotally, having friends in the trucking business and in the insurance business that write that insurance, I was shocked to find out how much the premiums are. Shocked.
It has put a lot of trucking companies out of business, and oftentimes it has absolutely nothing to do with their safety performance. It's just the insurance, the litigation environment that we're in, and it's become one of the major expenses in the trucking industry, and it continues to rise year after year after year.
All right, so in the meantime, we got these global supply chain issues, and I think the trucking industry, of course, is a big part of that, front and center in that. You can't help but see the shortage of truck drivers and truckers and trucking companies calling for people to come to work. How we doing?
Well, we had the problem before COVID ever hit.
Yeah.
The trucking industry's been struggling, from the driver staffing for some time now, and has been trying to be innovative in how they can attract more drivers. So, pre-COVID, we were already dealing with that problem. After COVID, you've got two problems. Number one, there's so many bad policies that incentivize people not to come to work. But then you also have got just the fact that everybody's trying to play catch-up now.
Yeah.
And when you don't have the manpower to play the catch-up, it really complicates things. The industry itself is doing a lot of innovative stuff to attract more people in. Of course, the pay and benefits. You'd be hard-pressed to find better benefits than what you get if you work in trucking, particularly driving now.
Yeah.
And I know we've got multiple members now that have given driver pay raises 3 times in a 12-month period. I've got one member that just gave a 33% pay raise increase just a couple of weeks ago. So there's a lot of money being thrown around. There's a lot of benefits. But what the trucking industry is having to do, as much as the pay and benefits, is reinvent themselves.
Yeah.
Truck driving is a difficult job. There's no doubt about it. But they're trying to reinvent themselves so it's not as difficult and more friendly to the current generations that are out there working now, the old, as they call them, little mossbacks, the old school guys that work from camp to camp and work as much as they could. It's not that many of them out there anymore. Another, we're looking for some non-traditional sources. Female drivers it's always been kind of a very small percentage, but people are starting to realize that's an untapped resource.
Yeah.
And in fact, one of the carriers here in Mississippi is one of the leading carriers in the nation as far as hiring female drivers. And depending on which statistics you look at, they have, from a percentage standpoint, more female drivers than anyone else in the nation. So they've found that, and it's interesting when you start talking to these people and they tell you, actually, a female driver, when it comes to service, they're better than anyone else because they're more attentive to detail. When it comes to safety, they're more cautious than a male. It's interesting when you start seeing that. But and then what you're seeing, you may have heard in the news here recently, is the trucking industry is trying to reach out and pick up more of the young drivers.
Yep.
A driver has to be 21 years old to cross state lines.
Right.
He can drive a truck at 18 as long as he doesn't leave the state. Well, there's a pilot program that was just released. It's part of that big infrastructure package that just came out, and it's a training and apprenticeship program that will take drivers that are 18 to 20 years old and put them through about a 400-hour apprenticeship program, put them in a truck that has all kinds of technology on it, collision avoidance, monitoring, and things like that, and introduce them to the industry before they wander off and get into another industry, so that hopefully we can pick up these young drivers before can. And it's good in so much as that a driver right now can get in a truck at 18 years old in Gulfport and drive to South Haven, almost 400 miles. He cannot get in a truck in Vicksburg and drive to Tallulah, which is just a few miles because of federal regulations.
Sure.
So it's a pilot program. Only 3,000 drivers will go through it. And fingers crossed that it'll take off and do well.
Speaking of federal regulations, we've talked about it here on the program. There's regs in place or orders in place that don't allow truckers from Canada to cross over into the United States unless they're vaccinated. And I believe the reciprocal is true from Canada. Yep. And so there's some 10,000 truckers in Canada headed to Ottawa to protest this requirement. Where does the association stand on this?
Well, the association, as far as generally on the vaccine mandate, back when the vaccine mandate came out, back in November, I believe it was, which was a nationwide vaccine, 100 more employees, so forth and so on. Mississippi Trucking Association, the Louisiana Trucking Association, and the Texas Trucking Association joined forces with the American Trucking Association and filed suit in the Fifth Circuit Court against the Biden administration and that OSHA mandate, because if nothing else, we felt that was an overreach by OSHA. But the reality of it is, it was going to decimate the driving force. So we were successful ultimately when it finally rolled all the way to the Supreme Court. So we're kind of proud to say here in Mississippi we had a large part in stopping that vaccine mandate.
Good. You got time to stay around?
Sure.
I want to ask some questions about how does one get into the business, and if they're seeking work to be a truck driver, for example, how do they do that, and where are the jobs, and maybe get the word out on that.
Okay, great.
We got Hal Miller, the president of the Mississippi Trucking Association, in the SuperTalk Studios. We'll be right back. We've got Hal Miller in the studio. He's the president of the Mississippi Trucking Association. All right, so Hal, no secret, your industry, you've been challenged with finding truck drivers. This isn't anything new. Seems to be exacerbated somewhat, like it is across the spectrum of our economy the last couple of years. Where are the jobs? What are the qualifications? Where do people go, and what are the opportunities?
Well, as far as where are the jobs, literally they're everywhere.
Everywhere, yeah.
I'm not sure I know of a trucking company that's not looking to add additional drivers and technicians. Let's lump that in as well. And both are great opportunities for careers. As far as where they are, it's really a matter of where do you want to be? What kind of driving do you want to do? Do you want to do more long haul, more local, more regional? All of that is available. It's going to require a little bit of research on the behalf of the person looking for employment to identify those companies and which ones do which. And it's not hard to do. As far as starting to do your searches on that, all the companies have gotten really. I think companies work harder at recruiting drivers than they do, keeping customers, because there are plenty of customers out there, but much fewer drivers.
Yeah.
As far as actually, if you don't have any experience and you don't have a CDL, there's a lot of different avenues you can go to get the CDLs. There are some companies that do actually do their own training and put you through a CDL school. There are many of the community colleges in the state provide driver school, CDL training, as there are some private operations that also do CDL training. There's a piece of legislation that's going to kick in, I think it's February 7th, which is the entry-level driver training legislation, ELDT, which basically defines what that training has to be before you can apply to get your CDL or go through the CDL process. And the different schools and the different carriers that are providing that training have to be registered as one of a certified trainer and meet certain minimum criteria. It's not a big hurdle to get over. It's just the Federal Motor Carriers Safety Administration's effort to make sure that the training is somewhat unified, and when someone comes in to get a commercial driver's license, they've been educated on the proper things.
Sure.
It really, I don't think it's going to slow down the process much. I think it scared some people when they hear about it, but at the end of the day, it's really not anything new. The only challenge will be the occasional person that learned how to drive from his Uncle Jake or whatever. Now he's still got to go somewhere else to get that certification or that minimum training before he can go, to apply for a CDL.
Well, with the demand exceeding the supply, the market adjusts to that, or else they don't survive, honestly. So this concept of work-life balance and really trying to make the job as comfortable, I guess, and as pleasant as possible. It's not the can-to-can't situation we used to have. I mean, I hear on the national media, I hear ads constantly from big trucking conglomerates looking for drivers, and they tout their environment for truckers, pay, benefits, time off, etc. It's different now, isn't it?
It is. And like I said earlier, trucking companies probably put more energy in cultivating new employees than they do cultivating customers.
Yeah.
And the great thing about it is a lot of our leadership in the state, whether it be in the legislature or in the executive branch, or you've got our different departments like the Department of Public Safety, they all are beginning to understand the importance of removing hurdles and roadblocks. Commissioner Tyndall and his team have really worked hard to streamline the commercial driver's license program because there were a lot of roadblocks and challenges in there, and so through their driver services program it worked really hard.
Yeah.
Then you've got leadership in the House and Senate that are looking at different ways, again, to from a commercial driver's license standpoint, without minimizing any safety issues, just remove those roadblocks. There's legislation out there right now being considered to make it easier for someone transitioning from military over to civilian life that has been operating heavy equipment. I know there's legislation out there, even this session, to make it easier for that guy who's been in the service to carry over his credentials from the military service over into civilian service in the CDL. So people are really beginning. I guess when you go to your grocery store and notice you can't get your favorite kind of cornflakes, you all of a sudden realize there's a reason behind that, and I think I can help. So it's great to see people understanding that issue.
Yeah, they get creative.
They do.
You have to get creative for mere survival.
That's right.
What about this rapid rise in the price of fuel? How are the truckers dealing with that?
Well, the fuel prices, I think at my last look, have gone up about 35% since this time last year. And with that kind of an increase, and fuel being one of the largest expenses, of course, in trucking, as you can imagine, it creates challenges. Now, a lot of trucking companies have in their contracts what's called a fuel surcharge, which does help adjust the rate some when fuel goes up.
Okay.
And then, of course, backs off of those rates when it goes down. And that takes care of some of it. When you're hauling freight, you've got that working in your favor. But when you're running empty, you don't have that. And so it does create challenges, and it does definitely put a bite in the operation. But it's just part of the business.
Yeah.
You've got contracts to hopefully deal with some of it anyway.
Right. And you mentioned about when you're running empty, and I'm thinking about the backhauls and how trucking companies really try to optimize and maximize the movement of those vehicles, which is expensive, to make sure that somebody's paying them to transport something when they do it. The technology and the systems have come a long way in the industry, have they not?
It's amazing.
A long way.
Amazing. Whether you're talking about from a safety standpoint, you've got so many things on trucks now. Collision avoidance systems. You've got, cameras monitoring front and back. You've got communication devices that say the driver gets in a situation where he does something that maybe he shouldn't have done a little more aggressively. Communicates back to his dispatcher saying, okay, you may need to coach this guy or take a look at the video and see what happened. It's just amazing, the technology there. Then, of course, the technology when it comes to fuel economy and just on and on, and which, going back to the supply chain, has created an issue because so much of what is on a truck now is technology, chips.
True.
You can't get chips. And there are literally thousands and thousands of trucks that are sitting on at manufacturers' plants almost completely finished except for a few components.
I've heard the same, yeah.
And so you're as bad as you want to go buy a new $150,000 tractor to pull that trailer, you can't get it right now in a lot of cases. And even more crazy is you've got carriers that are parking trucks against the fence so that they can use those trucks to pull parts off of.
Oh my gosh.
To keep the other trucks running because you can't get parts right now. So it's that technology has a lot of good and a lot of bad. The bad is like everybody else, you can't get chips right now, microchips.
Yeah, amazing. How does Mississippi kind of shake out amongst the states with respect to the industry here? It's pretty strong, isn't it?
It is. Well, the neat thing about the industry, and a lot of people don't realize in the state of Mississippi how big we are.
Yeah.
1 out of every 11 jobs is in the trucking industry.
Wow.
People don't realize that. They don't realize from a standpoint of the importance of the industry, 85% of manufacturers' goods in the state of Mississippi rely solely on trucks to be distributed. 95% of the communities in Mississippi rely solely on trucks to get what they need in that community. So from an importance standpoint, we're a heavy hitter. When almost 10% of the jobs in the state of Mississippi are in the trucking industry. And without trucks, basically nothing's going and nothing's coming. We rank high as far as the percentage of employees,
I had no idea.
as compared to the rest
That's
of the country.
fascinating.
Yeah.
And the outlook for the future, I mean, it's not going away.
It's not. It is not. And it's obviously, as people learn from, COVID, if you shut down trucks even for a moment, you feel it immediately.
No doubt about it.
In most other industries or professions, if they go hide in their house for, a month or two because of a pandemic, you're usually still okay. But if you did that for 3 days in trucking, all of a sudden civilized world life as you know it would start to come to an end.
And what's happened, I think, Hal, is it's brought that into focus, given the fact that we're so accustomed to buying anything we want when we want it and seeing it available on the shelves or online, what have you. And now with this supply chain situation, most people never even used the term supply chain until the last year and a half, and now everybody knows about it.
They do, and I think the great thing is people are starting to learn. It's not just trucks, it's not just trains, it's not just ports. It's every little piece. The guy who loads the truck, the guy who unloads the truck, the guy who manages the warehouse, the guy who puts the widget together, the guy who brings the raw material, the the widget. It's pretty complicated.
It is.
There's no one solution.
Very much horizontally and vertically integrated, as we say. But this country has done a fantastic job of building up that industry. We've come to rely on it. It's made us all more prosperous. That's the bottom line. And we need to continue to protect it, preserve it, and create the environment that allows it to thrive. That's the main thing.
Yep.
Hal, appreciate you coming on, man. Interesting conversation, and I'm sure we'll see you soon.
Thank you, Jordan.
You got it. We'll be back with more talk here on Middays. Stay with us. We'll be right back.